Hello everyone, we're now live. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Super excited about today's live show. We're joined by Walmart's Chief People and Corporate Affairs Officer for Walmart Canada, Nabeela Ixtabalan. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
You're making me feel bad now because I've got a stand-up desk, but I never use it. And here you are. You're making.
I tend to sway though. That's the only downside. So if I start to sway, that's the byproduct.
Yeah, I bought this like crazy mat, which clearly doesn't get used, where it's like a mat that goes under your feet, but it's got like bumps in it, like so it kind of recreates as if you was hiking. But it does the same thing. So when I do use it at home, it looks like I'm just walking around the room all the time. And guests are like, what are you doing? I'm just walking back and forth as well. But thanks so much for joining us. So first and foremost, congratulations on becoming a LinkedIn influencer as well. You beat me there, so I'm slightly jealous. So I'm not going to be honest, so it's fine. But honestly, it's one, all of the amazing work that you and the team are doing. I couldn't think of anyone else that deserves it more. And it just amplifies this incredible work that you're doing and the message that we're trying to put out there. So congrats.
Thank you, Chris.
You're
an inspiration too. The way that you are connecting and amplifying so many amazing voices in the HR space is remarkable. So but thank you for the recognition.
I appreciate it. For those that aren't aware of your work and your kind of personal journey around mental health, tell everyone a little bit about yourself personally and your mental health journey to where we are now.
Sure, absolutely. So I am a self-prescribed recovering workaholic. That is not a medical term. I feel like I have to say that disclaimer. It's just a term that I've applied to myself in my own journey of recognizing that I had a significant imbalance in terms of how I was conducting my work, performing my work, and protecting my personal well-being. So it's been a 10-year journey for me, Chris. I had my first anxiety attack a little less than 10 years ago. And since then, I've been working to really kind of recover my sense of self, my personal well-being, through a process that I can share a little bit more about, which I call my baseline. And one of the things that I think has really brought this journey to a head after the last 10 years is that I've decided to, speak openly about it, which is something I hadn't done until I joined Walmart Canada. So when I joined Walmart Canada, I decided I was going to stop pretending. And I was going to use my experience and what I've learned to try to change the narrative across the business spectrum. And I introduced myself to 100,000 Walmart Canada associates as a recovering workaholic. And since then, I've spoken openly, and it's a personal aspiration of mine to create a workplace for the next generation where people can both achieve professional success while protecting their humanity, their individuality, and their well-being. So I would also say I'm not... it's a journey every day for me. I think you know that too, because
me too.
A lot of personal, it's an everyday journey for me. So it's not something I've mastered by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, but part of it, right, is talking about it. Like, it's continuing to talk about it. For me, that seemed to be the biggest, thing. Since I started speaking about my anxiety, I haven't had a panic attack since. Mm-hmm. Whereas before, it would build and escalate because I would have no one to turn to. So I was so scared of telling my colleagues, friends, family members I was so ashamed of it that would in turn compound the stress and anxiety, and then it would lead to more anxiety attacks. But now if I feel that way, I can pick up the phone to you, to any of the network and say, look, I'm just not feeling great. I need a day off, or can you just talk to me? Because I'm feeling really anxious and I need someone to talk to, and that in itself has been a game changer. But sure, it takes a long time to it took me a lot, basically my whole life, since I can remember, to get to that stage where I felt like I could talk about it. And it happened in a way that I didn't expect, which I feel like happens to a lot of people.
For sure. Yeah. And for me, it was, I remember I left IKEA, my previous employer, which I was at IKEA for 12 years. And I had built up a brand of my at IKEA. I was this, person who could take the most difficult problems. I would travel wherever, whenever, however I needed to be, I would do multiple assignments at the same time. I kind of built this brand of, that I could do anything, work however long was necessary, and just make things happen. And IKEA is an amazing organization that really cares about their people. So I know I had people around me that loved me, cared for me, would have been there had I said anything. But I had built this brand that I was kind of superhuman, and I didn't have the courage to kind of poke any holes into that while I was there. But when I, had this break and I was thinking about entering into Walmart Canada, that's when I felt like, okay, here's my opportunity to really kind of introduce myself in my fullest truth. And and it was very scary. And I think it's still moments where it's really scary, but when I have the choice to choose between people's judgment and kind of the fear of being vulnerable, I choose to believe in people's compassion. And that's just how I make the leap on one side over the other.
Yeah. Mine was kind of, yours was a lot more intentional than mine was. Mine was like in the middle of a live stream on LinkedIn with Tim Munden, Chief Learning Officer at Unilever, incredible guy who was, and Paul Farmer, the CEO of Mind, the mental health charity in the UK. And they were both being super vulnerable, sharing their personal stories and challenges, mental health. And here I was struggling, for my whole life basically, and just kind of in this kind of point where I was like, I just accepted this is life and was like, I'm just going to live with this. And they were talking about it, and I was like, wow, if these people can do this, who are in, these huge organizations and have hundreds of thousands of employees, eyes looking at them, and they can do it. That it was during that podcast where I kind of started talking about how I was feeling. And it was like
live on LinkedIn.
Yeah, but like my wife didn't even know. We've been together for 14 years. My wife's been with me for 14 years and she had no idea. So like those times where I didn't turn up for that party or that, that meeting or that family gathering, it was like, oh, Chris doesn't care. Or like there's days where I didn't come in and my employees like, where are you? And that's why, and it wasn't I didn't care. I was just like, I didn't want to tell anyone. Or at some points I just couldn't leave the house because I felt so anxious that there was moments where I'd get on the bus, go down the road to work and feel so anxious I'll get back on and go straight home again. And I was like, I can't tell no one that. What are they going to think of me? What are my employees going to think that they're CEOs, but the misconception is that everyone's going to judge you and think you're weak, but it's the opposite. Yeah. And that was the biggest surprise to me. It was the amount of people that came and said, I'm feeling the same way. And actually saw it as a sign of strength and say, thank you so much for being brave for sharing it. And it was like the opposite, all of the fears that I had, it was like the complete opposite of that. And it empowered other people around me, friends, family members, to start talking about it. Even during lockdown, we had a weekly call with all of the guys because men are not great at doing this, probably some of the biggest culprits. And all of a sudden, I'd known some of these, friends for my whole entire life. And there they were sharing with me that they were in counseling or that they've been struggling. And I was like, wow, these are my best friends. My best friends. And we don't talk about these things with each other, let alone our colleagues at work as well.
That's the thing about, I think well-being and the different dimensions of well-being is that, and if we just speak specifically about mental health, like mental health is a global pandemic. I mean, there isn't anyone that hasn't struggled with it at some point in their life or doesn't have an immediate family member that's struggling with it or, may be at the verge of it. So it's just so pervasive. And I think just to your experience, once you start talking about it and we destigmatize it, you see the same thing. It's like everyone, has an experience to share, but we don't know it because up to this point, I think in a lot of organizations and a lot of circles in our personal lives, we haven't said anything.
Yeah. Did you have a similar response? Was people like, really, you, Nabeela?
Yeah.
The person that says yes to everything and all the projects? Yeah.
At Walmart Canada, they don't, the Walmart Canada organization doesn't know me any different. So I literally introduced myself
immediately
on the first call immediately. And not only did I say I'm a recovering workaholic, I pulled up a slide, which I call my failure wall of fame. And I talked about some of my more significant failures in my career. And again, I think that's also something I'm really passionate about. Like when we introduce ourselves as senior leaders or executives, we only talk about this, like the progressive nature of our careers. And it's like this one-way ladder where you only go up. And that is totally wrong. And I think what we need to also do, especially for a lot of young people, is share with them that that's not at all how careers develop. And there's a lot of downs and a lot of struggles, and we never talk about those either. So I think we give a lot of people a misperception of what professional achievement is and what professional success is. So I talked about my struggles and my failures across my career journey when I introduced myself. And that was also to really encourage this conversation around failures. And one of them was, I compromised my personal well-being for my career.
I was going to ask you that. Do you think you'd be where you are now in the position you are now without sacrificing that?
Yeah, so this is like the golden question. I get this question every time
Oh,
I
do
talk
you?
about it.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
because everyone's like, "Oh yeah, super nice that you can talk about it. You're a C-suite executive."
Yeah, yes, it's a good point. It's a fair question though.
Yeah, for sure. It is a very, very fair question. I still do believe I would be where I am today. It just would have taken me longer. So I was I was leading a $130 million business when I was 27. I was the CHRO of IKEA US at a very young age, so I'm 38 and, again, and this is my second time in a CPO role. So I do still believe I would have gotten to those roles. It just would have taken me longer. And if I could go back to my younger self, I would have made that trade-off because the speed at which I did it was part of what compromised my personal well-being, and I wouldn't make those choices again.
How did this impact your personal life outside of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's impacted my personal life significantly. I had my first anxiety attack was actually after I had my second child, and I had postpartum depression for almost 2 years, again, which I suffered with in silence. I didn't say anything, and my first anxiety attack happened while I was struggling with postpartum depression. And I think what's really interesting about the story, I had an amazing boss, who I personally love and is a good friend of mine. She created a very psychologically safe environment, but I was stuck in stigma, so I couldn't say anything to her. Just like you couldn't say anything to your wife, right? It's somebody you love, who cares about you.
Sometimes it's the people closest to us we don't want to share it with, because they're the people, because their opinion matters most.
Exactly. You just couldn't break that image that I had built. And the thing for me was like work was my safe place. But when I got home, I could barely hold my child. I could barely hold my child, and I was having crying spells and I could barely function. So I was high functioning at work. I could lead and manage a business and show up as if nothing was going on. And I got home and I was completely, I couldn't function. And so, that's when I really started to get help. So it was with the postpartum depression. My first anxiety attack was on a highway in Houston, Texas. And if anyone's been to Houston, it's like 12 lanes and speeding at, 80 miles an hour. So it was very scary. And it was, what you expect when anxiety attacks, you just shortness of breath, you lose ability to think, crying spells, you kind of lose control, and it's a very scary feeling.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you don't know what's actually happened to you. But at that, in that moment where you first have, I still remember my first anxiety attack, literally stuck with me. It's embedded. But at least now I understand what's happening, biologically. I've done a lot of research. I know what my body's doing. How I'm not gonna die. No one's ever died from an anxiety attack. Once the adrenaline kind of settles down after 5-10 minutes, you kind of recenter. So, but it's scary. There's no getting over it. It's terrifying. I
thought I was having a heart attack.
Yeah,
I was too young to have a heart attack, but I thought I was having a heart attack.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember the first time I heard someone say, "You just had a panic attack." And I was like, "What? Oh, that's what that was." I didn't even have a name for it. I was just, what it was happening.
No, and this is one of the things so when I talk about mental health and overall well-being, I talk about it in three kind of, spaces. I talk about the individual journey we all have to take, and recognizing the signs of burnout, recognizing the signs of anxiety, recognizing, like you said, Chris, you can read your body, you can sense when it's coming on, and you've put in coping mechanisms to help yourself. I've done the very same. That is a very individualized journey. Everyone's struggling with different things, their life circumstances. Maybe there's other underlying concerns that they have to work through as well. So that is kind of a road we all have to go through. And then I talk about it on an organizational level, because work is a huge stressor for a lot of people, and our organizations have a responsibility to provide the culture and the environment and the coping support for their associates and their employees. And then I talk about it on a societal level, because the stigma in our culture and our society is so deep, and we have glorified hustling and burnout and not sleeping, and culturally we encouraged it and glorified it, and basically created a narrative. If you just go on YouTube and Google success, all you get these videos about like no pain, no gain, and you just kind of push through. And in this whole narrative, I listen to this stuff now and I'm thinking, what are we doing? We are really creating a conversation or narrative and defining success for people in a way that really compromises their personal well-being. And that's what I grew up with. And that's what I thought for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I got asked recently if the workplace is ground zero for this conversation. The workplace, I think, is a significant part, obviously, of those three pillars. But I think the conversation at home, in schools, in public health environments needs to be just as aggressive, because my 11-year-old has a stigma about seeing a therapist. She hasn't entered the workplace.
I think you mentioned that before, that you share all of this with your kids. And that was something which was, for me, like, I even though I have only have a 2-year-old, nearly 3, I think about that. At what age would I share with Robin how my anxiety, is that going to somehow negatively affect her? Like, I worry about that as well. Like I found out that, my mum suffered from anxiety attacks, and again, hid it from us. So we would see my mum, there was some times where she was erratic, etc. We didn't know as kids that that's what was happening. So only years later now, I'm like, oh wow, my mum was having a panic attack. But we just didn't know. And she was like, it's fine. And would just not talk about it to us. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why I never talked about it as well. Because I was like, well, my mum didn't talk about it, so you don't talk about it. And no one else talked about it. So do that. But what I don't want to go too off topic. What are those, what are the coping mechanisms that you use?
Yeah. So I also want to reiterate, like, I needed medical help, and I sought medical help from a provider. So I had a therapist, and this is kind of, again, after my first anxiety attack, coupled with my postpartum depression. So I don't, there is a very important difference between, general well-being and mental health and mental illness, right? So, mental illness is a recognized medically diagnosable illness, and that when you're struggling with a mental illness, and I think severe anxiety falls in that category, you need to get professional medical support. So I just want to say that. In addition to that, though, I had to make some personal changes in the way that I was living and how I was prioritizing my personal well-being versus my work. So I created over many years what I call my baseline, and I published this again on World Mental Health Day and talked about it for the first time. It's a list of things that I know, if I don't protect, over time will lead me down the path of an anxiety attack. And I can feel it coming. Just like, Krista, I know you have a list of things you must protect. So first and foremost, for me, my faith is a big part of my well-being. I have a spiritual practice of prayer and meditation and that I do. And I protect that at like all costs. Even if I'm in the middle of a meeting or I need to stop and step away, that's something I do. I exercise 3 times a week. That's the minimum, but I'm doing 5 or 6 just kind of as my core. Eating all my meals. Simple as it is. I would skip meals, work through lunch, not have breakfast, just live off coffee, which obviously isn't very healthy. Getting 7 hours of sleep. And again, I'm not to say that this happens every single night, but I know if I go a number of days without sleeping 7 hours, that it'll catch up with me. Having breakfast and dinner with my kids, which again, I wasn't doing for a very long time because I would leave early, come home late, or travel excessively. Going outside once a week. And again, I think you said once a week to just get outside and walk in nature. And because that's for me is a really soothing and cathartic experience. And then I very strategically limit my exposure to negative news and media. And I felt this for the first time in its significance on me during the 2016 election in the US. I literally listening to news, I could feel my body get anxious. So I have a very curated, highly positive news stream. And I literally have to ignore negative news and media. And I say this very religiously to my team. I take all of my time off. If I have 4 weeks, I will take every single day off. I don't leave any time off, my paid vacation, on the table ever. And I think it sounds like a really simple thing to do, but we're struggling to get people to take time off right now because many people can't go anywhere and they feel like, they don't want to take time off just to sit at home in the middle of a pandemic, but you have to take that time off to rest and recharge. And I take all of it. Yeah.
Love that. We share so much in common, and I'll add, so, I'll kind of just go over mine. So mine's similar, like exercise is huge. And again, I like the way you said that if you're doing all of these things, it kind of reduces the anxiety and the like, you can have an anxiety attack. Mine's the same thing. So it's exercises, 3 to 4 times a week minimum. Sleep, definitely. I used to stay up to all hours of the night working, and then I'm just exhausted in the morning, and obviously my cortisol levels, et cetera, and it's just a vicious circle. Then I don't work out because I'm too tired, and it's just that vicious circle. And then food, eating healthy. I used to, a lot of caffeine, a lot of sugar. Guess what? I don't sleep. You don't sleep well. We've had a lot of sugar and caffeine. And then again, I don't go to the gym. So this is a vicious circle. And now I can recognize it. And I've also told my wife and business partner Shane and the team, like, to pull me up on it as well. If they start seeing me, get into those bad habits, Chris, come on, you need to get back on, they're holding me accountable and holding myself accountable. It's great to have people to help you out. Like you, I don't watch the news. Like I do not look at the news at all. It's so depressing. I haven't watched it. In the morning when I was younger, I used to, everyone before work, you turn the news on and you're actually getting ready. It's such a terrible way to start your day. It's never positive. So no, I don't watch the news. And I normally start my day listening to really fun, like comedy, like YouTube podcasts, like fun things, or I'm learning something on the way to work. So sometimes if I've even got a playlist of affirmations, which sounds like maybe extreme, but it's just like literally an hour playlist of just positive things.
Yeah.
Like I am statements. I am happy. I am all night. Even sometimes I sleep listening to those. And I wake up in the morning and I'm like super buzzed and positive for the day, because all I've been listening to all night long is these really powerful I am statements as well. And when I'm doing those things, I feel great.
Yeah. And I will tell you now, I am, again, I'm a senior leader at one of the largest companies in the world, in the middle of a pandemic. And I shared this with you, Chris, earlier when we were prepping, is that I recently changed jobs after 12 years at a company that I loved, and to come to Walmart, which is also a company that I love. And I also had an international move. So I moved from Sweden to Canada, changed jobs in the middle of a pandemic. And I share this with you also, and I'm happy to share with the audience. I also just recently went through a divorce. And I am doing well. And I think that's the thing. I haven't had an anxiety attack for almost a year. And it's purely because I have trained myself to know the signs. I know what my baseline is, and I protect it at all costs. And it's working. And I think I think it's a testament to all of those things. And had I not learned these things, I would be a babbling idiot at this point. I think I don't know that I can function.
Yeah, me too.
But it's definitely been an important process for me. And I would also just add, I'm constantly working on it every day, but it definitely has worked.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing I add, which I mentioned earlier, when I'm feeling that way, is just constantly talking to people about it. And if I'm feeling down or not work great, it's hard. It's never easy, but just talking about it.
And what I'm really, so we recently launched a partnership with Thrive Global at Walmart Canada. And what I love about Thrive, it's about all these little micro steps. I think we get this misperception that to really take care of ourselves and our well-being, that we have to make these huge life changes. But simple things like sleeping 7 hours a day, or protecting your health from a dietary perspective, or, getting out into nature, have a scientifically backed, positive impact on our well-being. And what I love about the partnership with Thrive, is that we're helping to create access to this information to all of our associates across Canada, because it's stuff I didn't know growing up or in my career. And this is, again, part of that education and awareness for you as an individual, which is that these things make a difference, and small micro steps can really help in your overall well-being. And we're hoping to create that awareness across the whole organization. Because
it's tough, especially if you're already feeling vulnerable, stressed out, anxious. Jumping straight in the deep end is not going to help. And try some huge changes is tough to be able to do that as well. So yeah, and you're much more like, I think Ariana uses the analogy of the New Year's resolution. How many people go into the New Year's resolution? How long does that last? It lasts just for January, and then you're back to not exercising and eating bad, and it doesn't work. And again, it's scientifically proven that it doesn't work. What are some of the other things then you're doing at Walmart then to protect?
So I would say this, first and foremost, we have identified well-being as a strategic priority at Walmart Canada and Walmart across all of our countries. And we've done that because we believe that there isn't a trade-off between well-being and growth. And I think that's actually a really important mindset shift that we all need to make, because historically well-being has been this thing that we do when it comes to like benefits or, employee assistance program, because we want to reduce absenteeism or, but there's actually a different entry point to this overall. And so our belief is that our focus on well-being will help people live a happier, healthier work life and life, right? And then that will have a positive effect on the business through, growth and productivity and other things. And also, we want to use our size and scale to make a positive impact in society in this conversation, because it is so pervasive and is affecting so many people around the world. And I think the next generation of employees will expect it. So I think having that conversation about the business case for this focus and its prioritization is really important. Chester Elton and I just wrote an article on the business case for focusing on well-being. And I think that's the starting point. We had that conversation, as an executive team, and we all agreed, right? And I think that's really important. We're all bought in the mindset. Mm-hmm. And then we applied the practices to ourselves as an executive team for about 3 months. Are we, healthy? Are we living kind of our best version of ourselves? Are we, do we have our own kind of baselines and integration? So we started with, the CEO and the executive team, really trying to put some of these practices in place and have our own experiences so we could share our own stories, because sharing our journeys and our stories creates the cultural permission for the rest of the organization to do the same. Destigmatizing the conversation is so important. So many members of the Walmart Canada executive team have shared their personal stories, have opened up and talked about, what they're struggling with and how they're improving their well-being. And then it's about education and awareness and access to tools and resources. So we've had lots of educational sessions with leaders about well-being, and we're making more resources available to them, like telehealth providers that we've made available during the pandemic so they can get professional medical support if they need it. The Thrive app, which we've launched across all of our associate base so that people can start to learn about how to integrate micro steps. We recently had a focus specifically on anxiety, because we know that the rates of anxiety and burnout are increasing exponentially. And we had Chester Elton and Adrian Gostick, who just released their book on anxiety in the workplace, come to, and host webinar sessions about anxiety. And then we bought 3,500 copies of the book and sent it to our top 3,500 leaders who lead the large majority of our associates. And
on that point, Nabeela, I want to stop you for a second there. One thing I love you did all of that's amazing, but one thing that I think was important is storytelling. And when you bought those books, the Anxiety About Work, you actually included a personal note of your story. And I think that's incredibly powerful. There's one thing sending a book to your leaders saying, "Here, read this." But there's another thing actually saying, "This is me. This is my journey. This is me being vulnerable." And then them reading that note, then reading the book. So I just wanted to point that out.
And I was actually surprised at the impact it's had. There's been so many associates who've reached out and just said thank you. And again, the personal note was really significant. I didn't think about it when we decided to do that, but that has been a really big impact. So absolutely. And then I would also just add for all the HR leaders in the organization. We've also assembled a task force. So in December, we put together a cross-functional task force. So the compliance team, our operational safety and security team that are really focused on health and safety in our stores and our DCs, the total rewards team, and different members of our leadership in the operations. And we assembled a task force and we said, what does the space of well-being look like and workplace well-being look like? We brought in external speakers and other well-being advocates from outside the organization. We listened. We brought in the Mental Health Commission of Canada. We learned, and we built a kind of a strategy and a frame for what we believe well-being is, and a roadmap over the next 3 to 5 years of how we're going to create a culture of well-being, and the programs that we want to accompany that. So what I also love about what we've done is that we've taken this out of this idea that this is just a total wars activity, and it is a cross-functional organizational movement. The other thing I'm really proud of, and in partnership with the Mental Health Commission of Canada, is we have committed to, just like you have our leaders are first aid certified, so in case of an emergency, they know how to respond. The Mental Health Commission of Canada is the first country to issue a voluntary certification to be a mental health safe workplace. And part of that is having mental health first aid certified leaders. And so we've committed to having 1,000 of our leaders mental health first aid certified, so that when our associates in our operations need urgent support in a mental health crisis, we have trained, educated leaders who can step into support. So we've just recently made that commitment, and we're on the journey to do that. And so many leaders have raised their hand and said, I want to be first in line to get that certification. So education, awareness, access, and the storytelling has been a really big part of our journey.
That's amazing, especially because so many leaders and us are unprepared for that. As you said, it's like, how do I take care of my employees and my team if I can't even take care of Chris? Yeah. So I think it's super important that we have those conversations and have that certification. And it's great that you have it recognized beyond those functions, like you mentioned, and it's part of the DNA of the organization, the why, the culture. And it is directly linked back to the business results, as you said. It's not something fluffy. Yeah.
Deloitte did this really great report recently where they went in and they looked at the S&P 500 and they looked at companies and how much they were spending on well-being. And over a 6-year period, they showed that companies that spend more on well-being can show a 4 to 6 times return on investment on every dollar they spend on well-being. So I think, again, the financial business case for this as a focus is starting to emerge more concretely. Mm-hmm. But I see this as the same kind of journey that companies have been on when it comes to sustainability or diversity and equity and inclusion. We always start with what's the business case, what's the why do we do this in the workplace. And then we move on to, once everyone agrees that the business case is there, which exists for well-being as well, then we move on to, well, this is expected and required to attract and retain talent. And then I think the really, I think differentiating companies will say, well, this is the right thing to do.
I was about to say it was out of my mouth.
And eventually, I think that organizations that are at the forefront of this journey well-being will be a competitive advantage for them, just like diversity, equity, inclusion, and just like the position on ESG and sustainability. And I would even go far enough to say, and Arianna Huffington wrote a great article about this on Earth Day, which is that well-being is a prerequisite for sustainability, and well-being is a prerequisite for diversity, equity, inclusion, because you really can't worry about plastics in the ocean or deforestation or be there for your colleagues to create an inclusive environment when you are struggling to function.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. One of the employee populations that have been affected and a lot during this is actually the HR leaders themselves. The last 15 months have been really tough. Yeah. How are you taking care of your own team? Because we don't, I say we, but HR leaders are some of the biggest culprits of not taking care of themselves and we always hear this, put your own oxygen mask on first, but the last 15 months is kind of taking that to a whole nother level.
For sure. And so, for me, again, I shared my baseline with my team and my direct reports. And I asked them to think about their baseline and share their baseline with the rest of the team to create accountability partners. And you said it earlier, Chris, you have met family members and friends that hold you to account on the things that you must protect. So we have accountability partners within the team that hold us at work accountable for our baseline. So I think creating that practice of sharing each other's baselines, having accountability partners in the workplace that can hold you to account and hold you accountable to that. And then sharing each other's stories so that we know what we struggle with and we know each other's stories has also been part of that journey. And then I would also say simple practices, like we start every meeting with everyone has to do 2 minutes. How are you? And it can't be work related. That's the only rule. So 2 minutes, how are you? And 2 minutes feels like a long time. Doesn't feel like a long time until you're like talking about how you're doing.
Yeah.
And I'll share this personal thing. I know it's working because we have been in lockdown in Toronto and in Ontario for a large part of the year. And most recently, we just came out of 8 weeks of stay-at-home order just recently. And as we were going into the most recent stay-at-home order, I was having this 2-minute check-in, how are you, with each of my direct reports. One of my managers said, and I quote, if I could sign up for a medically induced coma and sleep through this next 8 weeks, I'd rather do that than do another stay-at-home order, unquote. Wow. I was like, whoa. Okay, let's talk about that. But the fact that this individual was comfortable enough sharing that with me is something that it was a sign to me that the culture and the conversation we were having as a team was working, because then I could respond and support. And that's what we're doing as a people team to really protect ourselves. The other thing, and I really believe in this, the Potential Project was another organization that we work with at Walmart Canada, is really this concept between wise compassion and empathy. So I talk a lot about empathetic hijack, especially as HR practitioners, because we are the kind of responders to a lot of the different situations and crises in the organization. And I'm very sensitive to this as well. The difference between empathy and compassion, and not allowing yourself to be kind of mentally empathetically hijacked and your emotions, so affected by the experiences of other people, while still being able to, show the right level of compassion and support. That's a concept I think is really important for HR practitioners, and the Potential Project is got great literature on that and shared with HBR as well.
Yeah, because that's tough, because naturally as a HR team, you're exposed to this 10x most leaders, if not more. Yep. You're hearing it across over how many employees you have now?
We have 100,000.
Yeah, you're hearing it exponentially, and your team are not only having to deal with their own personal mental health and well-being, but now taking on the responsibility of everyone else's and all of the leaders around them, which is why it's even more important that we empower our leaders to have these conversations and prepare them, provide them the right skills, because we can't do it as a HR department. It doesn't lie with HR, it lies with everyone throughout the organization as well. Well, look, I'm just I'm so happy we're having this conversation. Like a year ago, it would have been so hard, or it would have felt really tough to be having this conversation. But speaking with people like you and Chester and so many others now, it's like really empowered me, and so many people listening. The messages that we get as well is like and even the conversations that it's opened up for me personally with friends and family, it's like, it's unreal. I get like emotional just thinking about it, to be honest, as well, because if you're listening right now and you're one of those people like myself and Nabeela, you know exactly what we're talking about. What I don't want to say the word advice, but what message would you give to people that perhaps are listening right now that are feeling the way that we're describing, and struggling with anxiety and depression, and just haven't really spoken about, or haven't come out and had that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think my advice to anyone who's individually struggling is reach out and get support and ask for help, depending on the severity of the situation. Whether that's a family member or a medical professional, I think just asking for help. And to your point, talk about it.
Yeah.
Find the partner or the person, the colleague who you can talk about it with. That's the kind of ask for help, and that's the first step. And then I think from there, it's really starting to build that framework for yourself and know the signs, so that you can increase your individual resilience and your individual coping mechanisms. Mm-hmm. And this is something else that we believe in, is that, organizational resilience starts with individual resilience. If each and every one of our associates can build their individual resilience, then collectively as an organization, we're more resilient. And resiliency, as we all know, in this like accelerating, crazy, ever-changing VUCA world, is going to be a differentiator.
100%.
Yeah, and for families, people, just think about our lives, like our ability to be resilient in this world is going to be something that's going to differentiate our happiness, our well-being as individuals. So, and then I think the other piece of advice is define your own success across multiple spectrums, and don't let anyone else define it for you. And this is something that was really important to me. So now when I think of success about on a multiple level, and I think about like, what does mental success look like for me? What does spiritual success look like for me? What does emotional success look like for me? What does physical success look like for me? What does social success look like for me? And that's going to be different for everybody. What is what kind of how do I want to affect the environment around me in a way that is meaningful? So let's get this concept of being successful outside of just the workplace and into other dimensions of our lives, because we need to redefine success.
Yeah, I love that. I've never thought about it that way, even personally, to look at it like that. But you're right, because I have a lot of success in the business realm and with the work that we're doing, but I never separate that. It's something because we've been kind of conditioned to look at success from this one lens, which is kind of part of the issue in the first place, right? Which leads to burnout, because we're always running towards this. as opposed to kind of breaking it down into those different areas that you mentioned. Yeah, that's super insightful. And also, to your point, don't let someone else's definition of success be yours, because that's where you can get into real trouble there. We kind of see the same thing happening with like social media, right? You look on Instagram or thing, you just see like the best version of that person, and it's just completely misleading as well. No one posts their bad day. No one posts a video of LinkedIn of them having a bad day or a panic attack. They just post all the great things that are happening as well.
Yeah, and I think I think this is the thing. I don't prescribe to the idea that this concept of you can have it all. Like you can be perfect at home and perfect at work and perfect in, the physical, the well. I think it's all a fallacy.
Yeah, you're right.
So if that's the perception of success that you're working towards, that's not the truth. And so I think we just need to, again, unlearn that concept and realize that that's not real.
Yeah.
Just like what we see on social media often is not real, right? It's a curated and like very, specified story.
Well, give yourself a break.
Yeah.
Give yourself a break. Like we're so hard on ourselves. Like, it's just give yourself a break. No, you don't have to be perfect.
Yeah, no one's perfect. And there is no perfection. It doesn't exist, right? So, but I want to use a personal example with this well-being circle that I talked about, because that's kind of, those are the dimensions of well-being that when I talk about well-being, I talk about physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, and environmental. I think the other really important piece of advice I give people is get comfortable saying no, because we're really uncomfortable saying no. And actually, Adrian Gostick just wrote an article about this, what I would recommend everybody read. But when you're tapped on the shoulder at work, or you're asked by a family member to do something, or whatever the circumstance is, when that compromises another dimension of how you define success, you need to pause and really ask yourself, like, is it worth it? Is it okay? So often we say yes because we feel pressured to say yes in so many dimensions of our lives at the cost of our well-being. And I think that's a muscle that we all need to work on, myself included. I
agree. You also have you're doing some work with your own live streaming now, right? I want to share it because it's such great. I only learned about it today, so I'm going to be tuning in. So tell everyone a bit about that.
Yeah. So at Walmart Canada, we've been on a journey to really explore what does it mean to be an anti-racist organization. So after the murder of George Floyd, we've had a long history of working to create diversity, equity, inclusion at Walmart. But after the murder of George Floyd, I think we all had to step back and ask ourselves, is it enough? And of course, the answer is no. So we really took a critical look at our diversity, equity, inclusion approach. And what we realized is that we weren't really having the difficult conversations. We weren't having the courageous conversations about race, religion, ethnicity, inequity, a lot of what's happening in society at large. We weren't talking about them openly and, in the workplace like we could have been. So we launched this series called Courageous Conversations, where we have the really difficult discussions in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, again, for education, for awareness, and for us to, create a more inclusive environment for our associates. More recently in Canada, there's been some really horrifying news that's come to, everyone's attention. And that's the history of residential schools in Canada. And there's been discoveries in BC and other locations in Canada where there's been findings of unmarked graves of Indigenous children, Indigenous person. And I think, Canada is coming to a reckoning with its history. There's also been recent attacks on Muslim Canadians, a really horrifying attack in London, Ontario, and more recent attacks on Muslim women in Alberta. So we, of course, we're having courageous conversations about these things. And we decided to take the conversation live on LinkedIn because we know that it's not a conversation we just need to have at Walmart Canada. It's a conversation we need to have as a community, as a business community. And so we launched our first LinkedIn Live Courageous Conversation on Monday, and it was about the exclusion of Indigenous persons in Canada and the road to inclusion. We had the CEO of Indigenous Works join us. I highly encourage, if anyone's interested in this topic, to watch it. You'll learn a lot. And then the question is, what do we do about it as a business community? And that's really what we want to get to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up as a side note because I think it's super powerful. And a lot of companies sometimes do these as like a tick the box. But you not only is it courageous conversations, but you're now putting it out there for the public on live, which is a big deal. Not many companies the Walmarts of this world are going to go live on LinkedIn and open up that conversation, especially around some of these topics that many companies and leaders are afraid to even talk about as well. So I think that's amazing.
We did it because we've been doing it for a year, and I think we've gotten more comfortable, and it has made a huge difference. We're having conversations today that we were not having a year ago. Yeah. Yesterday, Hayo, our CEO at Walmart Canada, and myself hosted a listening session with our Muslim associates and allies to talk about the recent attacks that have happened with Muslim Canadians. And, we're listening to learn and understand and have compassion for their experience, but we also want to know what else we should be doing to create, and how do we use our size and scale to make an impact when it comes to these inequities that are happening in society across Canada. So I think a year after the murder of George Floyd, it has to not just be about conversation, it has to be about action. And we're committed to using our size and scale in the best way possible. We also, Chris, just made a commitment to donate through the Walmart Foundation $20 million over the next 5 years to specifically tackle societal inequities amongst food insecurity and economic opportunity for Black and Indigenous Canadians. So we'll be working with community partners over the next 5 years to address societal and systemic racism and inequities that exist in the system in those two areas. Amazing.
Well, thanks. And people can follow that if they follow the Walmart Canada LinkedIn, right? Page, so and yourself personally on your personal page on LinkedIn, which will, Ivan, if you're listening, can you put the links in the chat for everyone? That would be great. We'll include those for everyone.
Yeah, we look forward to it growing and developing and really also learning from other companies and what other organizations are doing, both in Canada and across the world.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you for sharing your journey and experience. It's super inspiring, even for someone like me who's still on that journey, to hear other people talk about it. It means more than you can imagine. And to everyone listening, thanks for tuning in as well. Make sure you follow Nabeela on LinkedIn and the amazing work that Chester's doing as well. We mentioned Chester Elton and Adrian Gostick. Check out their book as well, Anxiety at Work. Apart from Nabeela, I look forward to seeing you again soon, but all the best until then.
Thank you, Chris. Take care.
Bye-bye.